The day my father-in-law handed me a printed eviction notice, formal, typed, even signed. He had no idea that the printer sitting on his desk was mine. That I'd bought it 18 months ago when theirs broke and nobody offered to replace it. That the paper in the tray was from a ream I'd picked up at Costco on a Tuesday after work, because like everything else in that house, someone had to. My name is Iris Vance. I'm 31 years old, and for 2 years and 4 months, I quietly paid $7,200 a month to keep a household running that never once thanked me by name. I met my husband, Brandon, at a work conference in Austin. He was funny and warm and completely certain about me in a way that made me feel chosen. We got married after 14 months. He lost his job 3 weeks before the wedding. I told myself timing was just timing. I told myself it would sort itself out. What I didn't understand yet was that in Brandon's family, things didn't sort themselves out. Things got absorbed, quietly, efficiently, by whoever was standing closest and willing. That turned out to be me. Moving in with his family was supposed to be temporary. Brandon framed it as practical. His father, Roy, had a big house in the suburbs outside Columbus, Ohio, with a finished basement and a driveway that fit 4 cars. His sister, Tanya, and her husband lived upstairs already. His mother, Deb, cooked dinner every Sunday and called it family. I told myself temporary meant 6 months, maybe 8. 2 years later, I was still there. Here's what nobody tells you about being the only employed person in a blended household. The bills find you. Not because anyone assigns them to you formally. Not because anyone sits down and says, here's your share. They just migrate, naturally, silently. The way water finds the lowest point in a room. It started with the electric bill. Brandon mentioned it was overdue. I paid it, one time. Then the next month nobody said anything, and I noticed the due date approaching and I paid it again. Then internet. Then the water softener rental because Deb's skin was sensitive to hard water. She'd mentioned it once and I'd filed it away and eventually just handled it. Then groceries. Then Roy's truck registration because he was waiting on a check from somewhere that never came. Then the mortgage contribution when Tanya's husband got his hours cut at the plant. I kept a spreadsheet, not out of resentment, at first. Out of habit. I'm an operations manager for a logistics company. Tracking numbers is just how my brain works. I color-coded it, blue for utilities, green for food, orange for what I quietly thought of as family maintenance, the category that kept growing. By month 14, I was averaging $7,200 a month. I never announced it. Brandon knew the money came from me because it came from our joint account, and he never asked questions about the joint account because asking questions meant confronting the answer. Roy and Deb never asked because people rarely ask where good fortune comes from. They accept it the way they accept sunshine, gratefully, automatically, without examining the source. Tanya made a joke about it once at Easter. She poured herself a second glass of wine and said, "Must be nice having a working sister-in-law," laughed at her own joke and moved on. I laughed too. I always laughed too. I stopped thinking of myself as a wife somewhere in that second year. I became a function. The account the direct deposits went into. The name on the utility confirmations. Infrastructure. Efficient and invisible and load-bearing in a way that nobody fully understood because I had never made them understand it. I thought I was being generous. What I was actually doing was making myself erasable. The eviction notice, that's not quite the right word for it, but that's what it felt like, came on a Saturday in March. Roy called a family meeting at the dining room table. Brandon and I sat on one side. Tanya and her husband Craig sat on the other. Deb stayed in the kitchen, which should have told me something. Roy cleared his throat and placed a single printed sheet in front of me. He'd been thinking, he said, and he and Deb had talked it over, and with Craig getting better hours now and Tanya expecting. I hadn't known Tanya was expecting. They were going to need more space. The basement was fine for a couple without kids, he said. But upstairs made more sense for a growing family. And since Craig's mother had a place in Dayton with a spare room, he let the sentence hang there. I looked at Brandon. He was studying the table. Roy kept going. It wasn't permanent, he said, just a reconfiguration. A few months maybe, until Brandon got back on his feet and we could find something of our own. There was even a studio apartment 2 neighborhoods over. He'd looked it up. $700 a month. $700 a month. While I was paying $700 in this house alone. I didn't say that. I took the paper. I read it slowly. It was a printout of an apartment listing he'd found on Zillow. Not a legal notice, but it felt like one. It had the address, the square footage, the landlord's phone number. He'd thought it through enough to print it out and bring it to the table. That's what landed. I folded it once. Then again. Then I set it down and said, okay, I'll think about it. Brandon let out a breath, like relief, like I'd just agreed to something that made his life easier. I excused myself and went downstairs. I sat on the edge of our bed for 40 minutes. I didn't cry, I did math. Here is what I had paid for in that house. The dining room table Roy had just been sitting at, the chairs. The overhead lighting fixture in the kitchen because Deb wanted something warmer, and I'd found one at a warehouse sale. 2 of the 3 televisions. The whole house water filter Deb's sensitive skin required. The garage freezer. The guest bathroom renovation, Roy called it a refresh. I called it new tile, new vanity, new fixtures, $4,400 out of my account in August. The new roof, partially. I'd contributed $6,000 toward it when the estimate came back higher than expected. Because Roy looked tired and Craig looked panicked and I had it and they didn't. I had receipts for all of it. Not because I'd planned this moment, because I always keep receipts. Operations manager. It's reflex. I opened my laptop and looked at my spreadsheet for a long time. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for full-service movers in Columbus. I called them Monday morning while Roy was at his brother's and Deb was at her book club and Brandon was still asleep at 10 a.m. They could come Wednesday. I said yes. I told no one. On Tuesday I cooked dinner like normal. Spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, salad. Tanya said it was delicious. I smiled and said thank you. I washed the dishes after and wiped down the stove and put the leftovers in the refrigerator in glass containers I'd bought because Deb didn't like plastic. I went to bed. Brandon fell asleep watching something on his phone. I stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly and thought about the spreadsheet until the numbers felt like furniture. Solid, immovable mine. Wednesday the movers arrived at 9. Brandon had gone out. He hadn't said where and I hadn't asked. Maybe he needed coffee. Maybe he needed to not be present for whatever he sensed was about to happen but didn't want to name. I walked them through the house with a list on my phone. Methodical. The movers were professional and fast. They didn't ask questions. That's what you pay for when you book the premium service. The dining table went first, then the chairs, then both living room end tables and the lamp I'd bought on clearance at HomeGoods because Deb said the old one was too yellow. The kitchen island stools, the garage freezer, 3 televisions. Deb came home at 11:40. I heard her car in the driveway. I heard her footsteps stop at the front door. The living room was bare. She stood there for a moment before she found her voice. What is this? Moving out, I said. Like you all asked. She looked at the 2 men carrying the island stools through the front door. Her voice went tight. Those belong to this house. I pulled out my phone and showed her the receipt. Her name was not on it. Mine was date, amount, store, tidy. She blinked at the screen. I kept my voice even. I have receipts for most of it, I said. The table, the chairs, the televisions, the kitchen light fixture. I can email them to you if you want to go through it. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Brandon called 20 minutes later, pulled up outside. I heard the car door, heard his footsteps, heard them hesitate the same way Deb's had. He found me in the bedroom sealing the last of the boxes. He stood in the doorway. His face did something I hadn't seen it do before. Not anger, not quieter and worse. You really called movers, he said. You really handed me a Zillow listing, I said. That was my dad. You didn't say anything, I said. Not at the table, not after. You let it happen, and then you looked relieved when I said okay. He rubbed the back of his neck. Where are you going to go? I already have somewhere, I said. I'd signed a lease on an apartment the week before. 1 bedroom, my name only, in a building 7 minutes from my office. I'd put down first and last and security deposit without saying a word to anyone. He looked at the boxes. He looked at the stripped room. He said, "You're being dramatic." I picked up my tote bag and my work laptop and walked past him. Roy got home at 2. By then the movers were loading the last of it. I was in the kitchen making myself coffee, my coffee maker, my good beans, when I heard his truck. I heard him come in, heard him go quiet. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was the color of chalk. The garage freezer, he said. Mine, I said. I bought it in October 2022. Receipts in the email I'm about to send you. He looked at me like he was trying to find a different version of this conversation. One where he held more cards. What about the roof? You can't take the roof. No, I said, but I can request reimbursement. My lawyer is drafting the letter. I hadn't hired a lawyer yet. By 5 o'clock I had. I checked into a Marriott near downtown while the apartment was being set up. I ordered a burger from room service and ate it on the bed surrounded by nothing but my own things. And I felt something in my chest that wasn't quite happiness but was so close to peace I couldn't tell the difference. My phone was busy. Brandon called 8 times. Deb called 4. Roy called twice. Tanya called once. And when I saw her name, I actually laughed a little, quietly, into the empty hotel room. Must be nice, I thought. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called my accountant. She was unsurprised in a way I found comforting. I told her I needed a full accounting of every transfer I could document to that address. She said she'd have a preliminary figure by Friday. The number she came back with was more than I'd tallied myself. 26 months of payments, utilities, household purchases, renovation contributions. She named the total and I had to set the phone down for a second. Then I called my lawyer. He was the one who surfaced the thing I hadn't expected. During the kitchen renovation I'd contributed to, Roy had initially framed it as a shared investment, his words, not mine. The contractor had drawn up work permits in a way that listed a co-owner, not a tenant, a contributing financial party. Deb had signed it without reading it carefully. My name was on 2 of those documents as a funding contributor, which in Ohio, combined with the documented transfers over time, gave me a potential claim worth arguing over. I didn't want the house. That was never the point. But I wanted them to understand that the ground they were standing on wasn't as solid as they'd assumed. That foundation has a name on it, I thought, and it's mine. My lawyer sent a letter on Thursday, formal, polite, itemized. It outlined my total documented contributions, referenced the permit paperwork, and requested either a structured reimbursement agreement or a formal mediation process to determine equitable resolution. Roy didn't call after that, neither did Deb. Brandon texted at 9 that night. One message. It said, "I didn't know it was this much." I looked at the message for a long time. I thought about all the mornings I'd logged into the bank portal and moved money without saying anything. All the times a bill appeared and I just handled it because handling it was easier than explaining it. All the times I'd told myself this was what marriage looked like. Bend, don't break. I typed back, "You never asked." I set the phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. The utilities went past due within 6 days. The streaming subscriptions lapsed. The internet service, under my name, it turned out because I'd set it up when theirs got disconnected 2 years before and I'd just kept paying, went dark. The home security system, which I'd set up and funded and which sent alerts to my phone, went offline. I canceled it formally. I documented the cancellation. By the end of the 2nd week, Brandon was at the hotel, not to reconcile, to negotiate. He sat across from me in the lobby, with a coffee he'd bought at the downstairs cafe, and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping. "Mom wants to know if there's a number," he said. "A settlement. Something that makes this go away quietly." I thought about the dining table Roy had sat at when he handed me that Zillow listing. The printer that printed it, the paper in the tray. "There's a number," I said. "My lawyer has it." He nodded. "Slow tired. What about us?" I looked at the man I'd married. The one who'd let his father hand me a piece of paper and hadn't said a word. The one who'd been relieved when I nodded. "I don't know yet," I said, and that was the most honest thing I'd said out loud in 2 years. The mediation took 6 weeks. Roy and Deb's attorney tried 3 different angles. None of them held. The documentation was too clean, too thorough, too time-stamped. My accountant had organized it into a binder that was 42 pages long. The contractor permits were the thing that finally moved them. You can argue with feelings. You can't argue with a co-funding designation on a filed building permit in Franklin County. They settled. Not everything I'd asked for, but enough. Enough that when I signed my new lease properly, paid my own security deposit, and put my own furniture I'd chosen for myself, not for someone else's comfort, in my own space, the account it came from was healthy. I didn't hear from Tanya. Not directly. She had her baby in June. I know because Brandon told me, not because anyone thought to include me. I sent a card. I don't know if they opened it. Brandon and I are in the process of uncoupling. That's the word my therapist uses. Civil, structured, honest. He moved back to his parents temporarily and then got a studio of his own. He got a job in March, warehousing, not glamorous but stable. He texted to tell me and I texted back congratulations and meant it. The house sold in August. Quietly. I know because the settlement included a clause and I received my portion when it closed. I didn't celebrate. I transferred the money into savings and made a note in my spreadsheet and closed the tab. What I kept was the spreadsheet. Not as a record of grievance, I don't need that anymore, but as a reminder of what it costs to go invisible, of the difference between generosity and self-erasure, of the fact that the most dangerous thing I did in that marriage wasn't paying the bills. It was assuming someone would notice without being told. I live alone now. My apartment has a small balcony and a kitchen I've stocked exactly the way I want it, and a coffee maker that makes an embarrassingly good cup of coffee at 6:45 every morning. I pay my bills on the first of every month and I feel something close to joy when I do it, because they are mine. Every line item is mine. Nobody handed me this. Nobody let me have it. I built the exit the same way I'd built everything else in that house, quietly, carefully, with documentation. The difference is this time it was for me.